I stood at the edge of the griffin pit, my wrists bound behind my back, watching my mother's satisfied smile as she raised her hand to give the signal. Below me, three massive griffins screeched and clawed at the stone walls, their eagle eyes fixed on me with predatory hunger. My sister Celestine stood beside our mother, wearing the crown that should have been mine, her lips curved in cruel amusement. "Any last words, little sister?" Celestine asked, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I looked at them both, the two women who had made my life a living hell, and smiled. It wasn't the smile of a victim. It was the smile of someone who knew a secret. "You should have killed me quickly." My mother's hand dropped. The guard shoved me forward, and I fell. The wind screamed past my ears as I plummeted toward the griffins, toward what everyone in the kingdom believed was certain death. But I wasn't afraid. Because 3 months ago, I had discovered something that changed everything. The griffins weren't monsters to be feared. They were calling to me. They had always been calling to me. The moment I hit the pit floor, the world erupted in chaos. But not the chaos my family expected. Let me take you back to where this really began. Not to today, not to my execution, but to 18 years of systematic torture disguised as family. I was born Princess Seraphina Ashford, second daughter of Queen Morgana and the late King Edmund. My father died when I was 3, struck down by a mysterious illness that left my mother as sole ruler of Valdoria. That's when everything changed. My mother had never wanted me. I learned this early. In the way mothers know how to communicate disappointment without words, my sister Celestine was everything I wasn't. Bold, beautiful, charismatic, and most importantly, she was born exactly 9 months after my parents' wedding. I, on the other hand, arrived 2 years later, an inconvenience, a spare, a child my father insisted on having despite my mother's protests. When father died, those protests manifested in cruelty. Celestine got the largest chambers in the eastern wing, overlooking the royal gardens. I got a converted storage room in the servants' quarters. Celestine had tutors for languages, music, diplomacy, and combat. I was allowed to attend only the most basic classes, and even then, only if it didn't interfere with my sister's education. Which meant I taught myself to read by stealing books from the library at night, learned arithmetic by helping the palace accountant in exchange for lessons, and discovered history through conversations with elderly servants who remembered when my father was alive. My mother's favoritism was legendary throughout the kingdom, though no one dared speak of it openly. At state dinners, I was seated at the far end of the table, often behind a pillar. At royal ceremonies, I stood in the back, while Celestine stood at our mother's right hand. When foreign dignitaries visited, I was introduced as the younger princess, if I was introduced at all. But the true cruelty wasn't in the neglect, it was in the act of sabotage. When I was 12, I managed to befriend Lady Helena, daughter of the Duke of Northmere. For 3 beautiful months, I had a friend, someone who saw me as a person rather than a disappointing spare. Then Celestine decided she wanted Helena's friendship too. Within a week, Celestine had convinced Helena that I had been spreading rumors about her family. I tried to defend myself, but my mother supported Celestine's lies. Helena never spoke to me again. When I was 14, I wrote a treatise on agricultural reform that could have saved thousands of farming families from poverty. I presented it to my mother's council. The next day, Celestine presented the exact same treatise. She had stolen my manuscript and copied it in her own hand. My mother praised her brilliance and innovation. When I protested, I was accused of jealousy and confined to my chambers for a month. When I was 16, a young lord named Thomas showed interest in courting me. For the first time, I felt seen, valued. We exchanged letters for 6 months. He wrote beautiful things about my intelligence, my kindness. Then Celestine decided she wanted him too. She seduced him at the summer solstice ball, made sure I walked in on them. 3 weeks later, they announced their engagement. My mother commissioned a portrait to commemorate it. Every happiness was poisoned. Every achievement was stolen. Every hope was crushed. The palace became a maze of humiliations. Celestine would accidentally spill wine on my dresses before important events. The kitchen staff, following my mother's subtle directions, would serve me smaller portions, colder food. The servants were instructed never to address me as Your Highness, just my lady, or sometimes simply Seraphina. My lady's maids were always the oldest, most exhausted women in the palace, assigned to me as a form of semi-retirement. I learned to make myself small. to expect nothing, to survive on scraps of dignity. But I also learned to observe, to listen, to understand the true workings of the palace that my sister, pampered and praised, never bothered to learn. I knew which guards were loyal to the crown and which were loyal only to gold. I knew which nobles genuinely supported my mother and which smiled while sharpening knives behind their backs. I knew where every secret passage led, every hidden room existed, every whispered conversation could be overheard. Knowledge became my only wealth, and I hoarded it like a miser. 3 months ago, everything changed. It was my 18th birthday, though no one in the palace acknowledged it. I snuck out before dawn, as I often did, to walk the forest paths beyond the palace walls. The woods were my sanctuary, the only place where no one watched me with contempt or pity. That morning, I wandered farther than usual and found myself at the base of Mount Ashenfell, the ancient volcanic peak that loomed over our kingdom. There, carved into the mountainside, was an entrance I had never seen before. Stone griffins flanked the doorway, their eyes seeming to follow me as I approached. I should have been afraid. But something pulled me forward, a calling, a recognition that thrummed in my bones. Inside, the cavern opened into a vast chamber, and there they were. Griffins. Not 3, but dozens. They perched on ledges and nested in alcoves, their magnificent forms a blend of eagle and lion, their eyes glowing with ancient intelligence. And in the center of the chamber, carved into the stone floor, was a symbol I recognized from my father's signet ring. My family's original crest, the one my mother had changed after father's death. An elderly griffin, his feathers streaked with silver, descended from the highest perch. He was massive, easily twice the size of the others. When his eyes met mine, I heard a voice in my mind, clear as crystal. Blood of Ashford, true blood, we have waited. I learned the truth that day. My father's family, the Ashfords, had been griffin bonded for 1,000 years. Each ruler of Valdoria was chosen not by birth order, but by the Griffins themselves. They were the true source of our kingdom's power, the reason Valdoria had never fallen to invaders, never suffered from famine or plague for long. The bond between Ashford and Griffin was sacred, symbiotic. But my mother wasn't an Ashford by blood. She was a Thornwood, a noble family that had schemed their way to the throne through my father's marriage. She couldn't bond with the Griffins, and she feared that I could. So she had hidden me away, starved me of opportunity, made sure I would never discover my heritage. Made sure that when she died, Celestine, who also carried no Ashford blood, would inherit without question. But the Griffins knew. They had always known. They had been calling to me my entire life, their voices disguised as wind, as dreams, as an inexplicable longing I could never name. The silver griffin, whose name I learned was Stormclaw, told me everything. How my father had visited them regularly, how the bond had made him strong, wise, nearly immortal, how my mother had poisoned him slowly over 2 years because he discovered her plans to eliminate the griffin bond entirely and rule through fear and military might instead of ancient magic. How the Griffins had been forced into hiding when my mother declared the Griffin Pit, a completely different location built specifically to murder would-be explorers, as the traditional home of Griffins, turning them from sacred bonds into feared monsters. She fears what she cannot control, Stormclaw said. She will try to kill you when she discovers the truth. Then I won't let her discover it, I replied. Not yet. I began visiting the Griffins every dawn. The bond didn't form instantly. It required time, trust, mutual understanding. Stormclaw taught me their language, both the mental communication and the physical signals. I learned to read their moods in the angle of their ears, the set of their wings. I learned their histories, their losses, their hopes. And they taught me about myself, about the power dormant in my blood waiting to be awakened, the ability to command not just griffins, but fire itself, the element that had forged our kingdom from volcanic ash, that ran through Ashford veins like molten gold. I had never been powerless. I had been locked away from my own strength. During those secret dawn visits, I also planned, because I knew my mother wouldn't let me live much longer. 18 was the age of majority in Valdoria, the age when, by ancient law, a princess could challenge for the throne. My mother would move soon to eliminate that possibility. I was right. 2 weeks ago, my mother announced that Celestine would be crowned sole heir on the day of the summer eclipse, a ceremony that required the participation of both royal children. The implication was clear. One princess would be crowned, and the other would no longer be needed. I began documenting everything. Every crime, every cruelty, every stolen document. I copied ledgers that showed my mother embezzling from the royal treasury. I gathered testimonies from servants she had abused. I found the healer who had treated my father, who confirmed in writing that his symptoms matched slow poisoning by nightsbane. And I bonded with the Griffins, fully, completely, irrevocably. The bond ceremony happened 5 days ago under the full moon. It wasn't gentle. Fire burned through my veins as the ancient magic rewoke in my blood. Stormclaw's consciousness merged with mine, and I could suddenly see through his eyes, feel his wings as though they were my own limbs. 20 other Griffins joined the bond, their minds creating a chorus in my thoughts. I could call fire from nothing. I could command the wind. I could communicate across vast distances. I became what I was always meant to be, a dragon princess, a ruler of flame and wing. But I kept it hidden. I returned to the palace and played the role of the meek, worthless spare. I let Celestine mock me at dinner. I let my mother ignore me in council meetings. I watched them prepare for the eclipse ceremony with smiles on my face and murder in my heart. Yesterday, everything came to a head. I was summoned to my mother's private chambers. She sat behind father's desk, the one piece of furniture she had kept from his study, and regarded me with cold calculation. "Serafina," she said, "I've made a decision about your future." I remained silent, waiting. The Griffin pit has been without sacrifice for too long. The tradition states that royal blood must be offered to appease the beasts every generation. Your father, she smiled, a cruel twist of lips, never had the strength to uphold this tradition. But I do. You're going to throw me to the Griffins tomorrow during the eclipse ceremony. It will be quite dramatic. You'll attempt to sabotage your sister's coronation. At least that's what everyone will believe, and as punishment, you'll be sentenced to the pit. Quick, decisive, final. She leaned forward. You'll finally be useful, little Serafina. Your death will be a gift to the kingdom. I had expected this, but hearing it stated so plainly, so casually, still sent ice through my chest. This woman who should have protected me was planning my murder with all the emotion of planning a menu change. And if I refuse to play along with your sabotage story, then we'll simply say you're mad with jealousy. Either way, you're going into that pit. She stood, walked around the desk. You were always weak, Serafina, like your father. He clung to old stories and ancient magics, refused to embrace the future. Look where it got him. A grave, I said softly. That you put him in. Her hand cracked across my face, the rings she wore cutting into my cheek. Careful, you could go into that pit with your tongue removed. Would you like that? I touched the blood on my cheek and smiled. Do what you want, Mother. Tomorrow will be memorable. She mistook my smile for hysteria. That was her first mistake. The eclipse ceremony began at noon. The entire court assembled in the Grand Plaza, where a platform had been erected beneath the palace's highest tower. Celestine stood in the center, resplendent in white and gold, a new crown glittering on her head. My mother sat on her throne, elevated above everyone else. I stood at the far edge of the platform, hands bound, guards on either side. The story had already spread. The bitter, jealous sister who had tried to poison the air. The evidence was fabricated but thorough. A servant had found nightsbane in my chambers. Another had overheard me plotting. It was almost funny how similar it was to what my mother had done to father. The crowd watched with mixed expressions. Some showed pity, most showed contempt. How dare the spare challenge the chosen one? My mother stood and raised her hands. Citizens of Valdoria, today we crown a new era, but first we must cleanse ourselves of treachery. She launched into a speech about loyalty, about the sacred bond between ruler and ruled, about how betrayal must be punished. The crowd ate it up. Celestine stood there looking noble and wronged. I remained silent, waiting for my moment. Serafina Ashford, my mother finally said, turning to me. You are hereby sentenced to the Griffin pit. May the beast show you more mercy than you showed your own blood." The guards grabbed my arms. The crowd murmured with excitement and horror. This was the entertainment they'd come for. They marched me through in the streets, a parade of humiliation. Citizens lined the roads, some throwing rotten fruit, others just staring. Celestine and my mother rode in a gilded carriage behind me, playing their roles as the wounded parties. We reached the pit, the false pit, the one my mother had constructed to maintain her lie. The 3 griffins inside were actually wyverns, smaller, mindless, vicious creatures she had imported and deliberately starved. They would tear apart anyone thrown inside within minutes. The wooden platform extended over the pit's edge. Below, the wyverns shrieked and snapped, sensing fresh meat. My mother gave her final speech about justice and tradition. Celestine dabbed at dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. And then came my sister's question. "Any last words, little sister?" I smiled. "You should have killed me quickly." They pushed me. I fell, but I didn't scream. I closed my eyes and called with every ounce of my being. Now. The response was immediate. The sky darkened as the actual eclipse began, but it wasn't the moon blocking the sun. It was wings. Dozens and dozens of wings. The griffins descended on the pit like divine vengeance. Stormclaw dove first, his massive form catching me midair with impossible grace. I landed on his back as he banked upward, and the 3 wyverns below screeched in terror as 20 griffins landed in the pit around them. The wyverns didn't stand a chance. The crowd's excitement turned to terror. People screamed and ran. Guards drew weapons uselessly. On the platform above, my mother had gone pale as death, and Celestine stood frozen in shock. I stood on Stormclaw's back as he hovered above the pit, and I felt the fire in my blood respond to my call. Flames erupted along my arms, burning away the ropes binding my wrists. My hair lifted in a wind that answered only to me, and when I spoke, my voice carried across the entire plaza, magnified by griffin magic. "People of Valdoria, you have been lied to!" Every eye turned to me. Even those who had been running stopped to stare. "My name is Seraphina Ashford, true daughter of Edmund Ashford, and I am the rightful griffin-blessed ruler of this kingdom." I raised my arms, and the flames grew brighter. "The woman on that throne is a usurper, a poisoner, a murderer who killed my father and has ruled through fear and deception for 15 years. "She lies!" my mother shrieked. "She's mad! Guards, shoot her down!" The guards raised their crossbows, but before they could fire, griffins landed around the platform. Stormclaw carried me up to stand opposite my mother and sister, and the assembled griffins created a circle of wings and talons around us. "I lie?" I asked softly. "Then let's share some truths." I pulled the documents from inside my jacket. I'd hidden them there this morning, waterproofed and sealed. I threw them into the air, and wind carried them across the plaza, raining evidence down on the crowd. "Read them! Read about the treasury funds stolen, the servants abused and silenced, the healer's testimony about my father's murder." My voice broke with genuine emotion. Read about 15 years of cruelty and lies. People grabbed the papers, reading frantically. I saw nobles' faces pale as they recognized their own signatures on documents they'd been told were destroyed. I saw merchants realize their taxes had been tripled while my mother hoarded gold. I saw the captain of the guard read the healer's testimony and look up at my mother with betrayal in his eyes. "These are forgeries," Celestine shouted, finding her voice. "She's trying to steal my crown." "Your crown?" I laughed, and it was not a kind sound. "You have no right to that crown, sister. You carry not a drop of Ashford blood." The crowd gasped. Celestine went very still. "Oh, yes," I continued, enjoying this now. "Did you think I didn't know? Did you think I wouldn't find the records my mother tried so hard to destroy?" I pulled out one more document, the birth record I'd found hidden in the royal archives, the one that showed the truth. Celestine was born 4 months after our parents' wedding, not 9, which means she was conceived months before the marriage, while mother was still betrothed to Lord Marcus Thornwood. I threw it down at my mother's feet. "Tell them, mother. Tell them whose daughter Celestine really is. Tell them why you could never bond with the Griffins. Tell them why you killed my father." The silence was deafening. My mother stood frozen, her face a mask of rage and terror. Celestine looked between us, her perfect composure finally cracking. "It's not true," Celestine whispered. "Tell them it's not true." But my mother said nothing. She couldn't, because every accusation was written proof, scattered across the plaza for all to see. The captain of the guard stepped forward, his hand on his sword. "Your Majesty, Queen Morgana, is this true?" My mother's face transformed into something ugly, something that had always been there beneath the royal mask. "True? What does truth matter? I have ruled this kingdom for 15 years. I have kept it strong. That sniveling weakling Edmund would have destroyed everything with his obsession with ancient magics and mythical puns." She pointed at me with a shaking hand. "And you were supposed to be nothing. You were supposed to disappear, die, fade away like every other useless spare." The crowd recoiled. Even Celestine stepped away from her. "You want to know the truth?" My mother continued, losing control completely. "Yes, I poisoned Edmund. He discovered I was pregnant before our wedding, threatened to annul our marriage and disinherit Celestine. So I married him, played the devoted wife, and eliminated him slowly. And yes, I stole from the treasury. It was my right as queen. And yes, I planned to kill this worthless girl." She spat at me. "You were always worthless. You are worthless. You will die worthless." The guards seized her. She fought them, screaming obscenities, all pretense of nobility abandoned. Celestine stood apart, tears streaming down her face, her crown sitting askew on her head. I looked at my sister, then, and felt not quite pity, not quite satisfaction, something more complex. "You knew," I said quietly, about father, about the theft. Maybe not at first, but eventually you knew." Celestine's silence was answer enough. "You could have stopped her. You could have stood up for what was right. But you didn't, because you enjoyed watching me suffer. Because it made you feel powerful." I stepped closer. "That crown you're wearing, it was never yours to claim, not by blood, not by right, and certainly not by character." I reached out and lifted the crown from her head. She didn't resist. She just stood there, diminished, as I held up the symbol of Valdoria's power. "People of Valdoria!" I called out again, my voice carrying across the plaza. "I do not ask you to accept me as your queen based on blood alone or Griffin bonds alone. I ask you to judge me by my actions. I have endured 18 years of cruelty and emerged with compassion. I have been denied every advantage and still educated myself. I have been beaten down and still stand tall. I offer you not fear and lies, but truth and justice." The griffins behind me spread their wings in unison, a display of magnificent power. Stormclaw roared, and the sound echoed off the mountains like thunder. "I offer you the return of the ancient bond, the protection and prosperity our ancestors knew. I offer you a queen who understands suffering because she has suffered. A queen who values every citizen because she has been treated as worth nothing." I placed the crown on my own head. I claim my birthright. I claim my father's throne. And I claim justice for every wrong committed in the name of false power. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then someone in the crowd, an old woman bent with age, called out, "All hail Queen Seraphina!" Others took up the cry, "All hail Queen Seraphina!" It spread through the plaza like wildfire. "All hail the Griffin Queen!" The captain of the guard knelt. Then his men. Then the nobles. Then the entire plaza knelt, all except my mother, who was now held firmly by guards, and Celestine, who stood alone in her stolen finery. I had won, but the palace still stood, a monument to my mother's crimes, and I was not done. "There is one more thing," I said, and the crowd quieted again. "This palace was built by my great-great-grandfather, but it was corrupted by my mother's reign. Every stone remembers the screams of servants beaten for sport. Every corridor echoes with stolen laughter and broken dreams. Every room contains the ghost of justice denied. I called the fire real fire this time, not just the flames that danced on my skin. The Griffins added their power to mine, and together we were a force of nature. Flames erupted from my hands, spreading across the platform, racing up the palace walls. The crowd gasped and backed away, but I controlled it perfectly, burning only what I wished to burn, sparing the people, focusing the inferno on stone and wood and corrupt legacy. From these ashes, we will build something new, I declared as the palace began to collapse, centuries of history crumbling into flame. A palace where all are welcome, where justice is not a weapon but a shield, where power serves the people, not the other way around. The palace burned. The flames reached higher than the mountains, visible from every corner of the kingdom. My mother screamed as her stolen throne melted, as her private chambers where she'd plotted murder turned to ash, as every symbol of her reign was consumed by fire. I stood untouched in the center of the inferno, flames swirling around me like a cloak, the griffins circling overhead like dark angels. The crown on my head glowed cherry red from the heat but did not burn. The people watched in awe and terror and joy. When it was over, when nothing remained of the palace but smoking ruins and the foundation stones, I landed in the center of the plaza. The ground beneath my feet was scorched but solid. The crown had cooled to its original gold, and the kingdom was mine. 5 years have passed since that eclipse day. They call it the Day of Flames now, a holiday celebrated throughout Valdoria. The palace we built from the ashes is different from the old one. It has larger windows, wider corridors, and no servants' quarters hidden away in dark corners. Every person who works here is paid fairly, treated with respect, given opportunities for education and advancement. The treasury is open for public inspection. The council includes representatives from every district, not just nobles. My mother was tried for murder, theft, and treason. The evidence was overwhelming. She was sentenced to life imprisonment in the tower she'd once ruled from, the only piece of the old palace I'd left standing, specifically for this purpose. She spends her days in the small room at the top, with one window overlooking the kingdom she tried to steal. I visit her once a year, on the anniversary of my father's death, and tell her about all the good things we've accomplished. She never speaks anymore, just stares at that window and watches the kingdom thrive without her. Celestine's fate was more complicated. She hadn't committed any crimes directly. She'd been raised by a monster and became monstrous through nurture rather than nature. I gave her a choice: face trial for complicity in her mother's crimes, or accept exile with a modest stipend and the chance to build a new life somewhere far from Valdoria. She chose exile. Last I heard, she was living in the Southern Isles, teaching music to children. She sends me a letter every year on my birthday, always the same. I'm sorry, I should have been better. I never reply, but I don't throw them away either. Some wounds can't heal, but they can scar over. The Griffins live openly now, nesting in the mountains and flying freely over the kingdom. Children grow up knowing their true nature, not as monsters, but as guardians. Twice a year, young people from across Valdoria come to Mount Ashenfell for the chance to bond with a griffin. Not everyone can. It requires a specific resonance of spirit, but those who do become Griffin Knights, protectors of the realm. Stormclaw is my constant companion. We've never spent a day apart since the bonding. Through his eyes, I can see the farthest reaches of my kingdom. Through his strength, I can protect my people. Through his wisdom, which spans centuries, I learned to be the kind of ruler my father wanted to be. I'm 23 now. People call me the Flame Queen, the Phoenix Sovereign, the Dragon Heart. I've negotiated trade agreements with 6 kingdoms, established schools in every district, and reformed the justice system to protect the powerless. Marriage proposals arrive weekly from foreign princes and nobles, but I'm in no hurry. I spent 18 years being told I was worthless. I'm spending my 20s proving them catastrophically wrong. Sometimes in the quiet moments before dawn, I walk through the new palace and think about that girl in the storage room, the one who taught herself to read by candlelight, the one who was served cold soup and colder contempt, the one who survived on scraps and secrets. I honor her by remembering her, by making sure no child in my kingdom ever feels that worthless again, by being the queen she dreamed about in her darkest hours, the one who would sweep in and save her, not realizing she would have to save herself. The throne room has a window now, positioned so the sunrise streams directly onto the throne every morning. I sit there often, Stormclaw perched beside me, and watch the kingdom wake up. Farmers tend fields that have tripled their yields thanks to Griffin-blessed soil. Merchants open shops that were built with treasury loans for small business. Children run to schools that teach griffin riding alongside mathematics. I didn't just burn down my mother's palace. I burned down her legacy, her cruelty, her vision of a kingdom built on fear and inequality. From those ashes, we built something better. Sometimes, when I'm meeting with foreign dignitaries or settling disputes between nobles, I catch my reflection in the polished shields my guards carry. I look like my father now. They tell me I have his eyes, his smile, his way of listening that makes people feel heard. But I have something he never did: the hardness that comes from surviving the unsurvivable. I am compassionate, but I am not soft. I am kind, but I am not weak. My mother wanted to throw me away, wanted me to disappear into griffin jaws and leave no trace. Instead, I returned with griffins at my command and burned away everything she built on lies. The servants who once served me cold soup and colder contempt now bow when I pass, but more importantly, they smile. Because they know I see them. I remember being invisible, so I make sure everyone is visible now. The nobles who once laughed at my shabby dresses in storage room chambers now compete for my favor, but they do so by serving the kingdom well, not by scheming and manipulating. Those who can't adapt to a rule based on merit rather than manipulation find themselves replaced. And the people, my people, they thrive. Valdoria has become a beacon of prosperity and justice. Other kingdoms send emissaries to learn our methods, to understand how we transformed from a corrupt monarchy to a flourishing realm in just 5 years. The answer is simple. I remember being powerless, so I share power. I remember being voiceless, so I amplify other voices. I remember being thrown away, so I ensure everyone has value. Last week, a young girl came to the palace gates. She was dirty, dressed in rags, and the guards almost turned her away, but I was flying overhead with Stormclaw and saw her. I landed in the courtyard and asked what she needed. "Your Majesty," she said, so small and brave. "My father hurts me. My mother does nothing. I have nowhere else to go." I knelt down to her level, and in her eyes I saw myself at her age. "You came to the right place," I told her. "You are safe now. You are seen. You matter." She cried then, and I held her while she did. Later, I personally ensured she was placed with a family who would love her, and I made sure her abusive parents faced justice. That's what I do now. That's what my crown means. Every child who suffers, I save. Every voice that's silenced, I hear. Every person who's thrown away, I catch. Because I was that child. I was that voice. I was thrown into a pit to die, and instead I rose from it with fire in my veins and justice in my heart. The palace gardens are beautiful now. We planted them where the old dungeons used to be. Another symbolic gesture. Flowers grow where prisoners once suffered. Children play where executions were planned. Life flourishes where death once reigned. I have a favorite spot there, a bench beneath an ancient oak tree that somehow survived the burning of the palace. I sit there sometimes in the evening, still wearing my crown because it's become as much a part of me as my own skin, and I watch the sunset paint the mountains gold and red. Stormclaw usually joins me, settling beside the bench with his great head resting near my shoulder. We don't always speak. We don't need to, not anymore. The bond runs deeper than words. "Do you regret it?" he asked me once, a year after my coronation. "The burning? It was your father's palace, too." "My father would have burned it himself if he'd known what it became," I replied. "He built it as a symbol of hope." She turned it into a monument to cruelty. Better to start fresh than try to cleanse corruption from every stone. "You are wiser than he was," Stormclaw observed. "He was kind but blind to treachery. You are kind but see everything." "I had a good teacher in seeing treachery," I said dryly. 15 years of advanced study. We watched the sunset together, and I felt, perhaps for the first time since I was 3 years old, truly at peace. My story isn't a fairy tale. I wasn't rescued by a prince or a fairy godmother. I saved myself, with fire and fury and the ancient bond that ran in my blood all along, just waiting to be awakened. They threw me to the Griffins, thinking I would be torn apart. Instead, I became their master. I became the storm itself. I became the flame that purifies and the wind that carries change. And when I returned, I didn't just defeat my enemies, I transformed an entire kingdom. The old palace is gone. The old queen is imprisoned. The old lies are exposed. In their place, truth, justice, and a ruler who remembers what it means to suffer and therefore fights to end suffering for others. Sometimes I still wake up in the night dreaming I'm back in that storage room, cold and alone and worthless. Then Stormclaw's mind touches mine, reminding me where I am. I walk to my window, huge, deliberately oversized, flooding my chambers with light, and look out at the kingdom spread below me like a tapestry of possibilities. I am Queen Seraphina Ashford, the Flame Queen, the Phoenix Sovereign, bonded to Griffins and crowned by fire. I was thrown away and came back as something my mother never imagined possible. Not a victim, but a victor. Not bitter, but better. And every morning when the sun rises and streams through my throne room window, I sit in that light and make decisions that affect thousands of lives. I make them with compassion born from suffering and wisdom born from survival. They tried to kill me. They failed, and now they watch from a tower prison in distant exile as I build the kingdom they could never imagine. One where the worthless become worthy, where the powerless gain voice, where the thrown away are caught and cherished. This is my revenge, not their destruction, but their irrelevance. They are footnotes in my story now, cautionary tales I tell when training new administrators in the importance of justice and mercy. I am the queen who burned the palace down, who rose from Griffin's jaws with fire in my hands, who transformed suffering into strength and cruelty into compassion. And I have never been worthless. I have never been weak. I have always been exactly what I am now. A queen in waiting, a storm gathering, a flame that refuses to be extinguished. They threw me to the Griffins. I returned as their master, and I burned their palace down. Now, from those ashes, we build something beautiful.